Hey there, it's Corey. Welcome back to Family Twist. If you missed part one of Nick's story, go treat yourself to that first because, wow. And you really won't know what's going on in this episode if you don't listen to that one first. Today you're going to hear about Nick's book and podcast and stepping right into the role of gentle truth teller for donor-conceived folks everywhere. We talk about the mystery siblings raised by the donor, the detective work all of us end up doing whether we want to or not, and why telling the truth out loud is sometimes the only way to survive it. Let's get back into it with Nick.
I've thought about all the ins and outs of all of this, and I forget if I mentioned, I ended up writing a book about my story. And part of what I speculate on is like, if I'm one of those two kids that the donor raised himself, and I knew that I had other half siblings out there, wouldn't I want to have direct access to that information myself via a DNA test rather than having to rely on, in my donor's case, an extended family member who is the one that happens to be connected to us on 23andMe? To me, like if I were in their shoes, the donor's children's shoes, I would want to take a test. So like, I'm not relying on anyone else for this info. And to date, we're not connected to any of them.
How did they discover that you do have, two half siblings that were raised by the donor?
Well, once we discovered who the donor was, we were able to access his Facebook profile. At the time, there were Instagram pages that were available. And we just, all DCPs become detectives once they figure out this part of them themselves. And in our case, we were just able to do some sleuthing and kind of put the pieces together.
Has anyone in your sibling group wanted to reach out to those half siblings just to, just drop the bomb?
I think all of us probably want to, but because we're unsure of their situation, we want to be respectful of their privacy and to not drop the bomb on them. It doesn't feel like it's our place to do so. That kind of feels like the donor and his wife's job. So, yeah, with respect to the children he raised, I don't think there's any real interest in doing that. That said, because I wrote a book and because there are writers in the donor's family, I have toyed with the idea of reaching out to the donor and saying, hey, like, there's a book about what my experience was and what you helped to create. And yeah, I still haven't mustered up the courage to reach out and share that with him. I have never had any direct correspondence with him, but part of me wants to let him know and give him the option. Like, I'm not going to just mail him a copy of the book and have it on his, show up on his doorstep. But I think I would like to at least tell him, like, hey, if you are interested, and I don't need a response either, but if you are interested, this exists. Someone that you're biologically connected to, and maybe you want to read about what I went through in this process. His parents and grandparents, we are aware of the major health concerns that we should have noted. But you're right, like in the case of the donor's children, we don't know. And I guess at this point, the assumption, and I don't know if it's a safe one, but the assumption would be that because we are aware of who the donor is and he is aware of us, that if there was anything serious that we needed to be mindful of, that he would let us know. That's, I think, putting a lot of trust into someone that ultimately we don't know. If there was information about a medical issue that we needed to know about, I trust that he would fill us in on that, just given the fact that we know who he is and he knows that. I think I'm putting a little bit of faith into how I would expect the donor to react and respond if this were the case. I think part of it also is like, of the 14, there's 12 of us who were not raised by the donor, and we are all aware of each other as well. So if anyone has a medical issue that comes up, there's open lines of communication there too, which if God forbid something were to happen and maybe it's unclear, like what exactly the problem is or where it's coming from, I think that would kind of trigger a response and, reach out to the donor and say, hey, like, we need you to shed some light on this. But knock on wood, to date, nothing like that has happened, thankfully.
Nick, can you talk a little bit about why you decided to start a podcast and what the format is like?
Sure. You know what? If you don't mind, I'll start with the book that I wrote
Okay.
because that's first, and then I'll shift quickly into the podcast. But the reason the book came to be was because of this whole idea that I've touched on, like being open about what I was going through, not just me, but my family as well. That felt like it was the most healing approach to take. Was there might be pain along the way and there might be difficulty, but getting this all cleared out is what's ultimately going to put us in the best position to go forward. So with that in mind, beyond just the conversations I was having with my family, I knew for myself, part of the healing process was to just write all of what I was feeling, emotions and thoughts and all of that, write it down just in like a journal form. It wasn't anything where I thought, oh, I'm going to write a book right off the bat. I was just trying to use this as a therapeutic tool for what I was going through. And eventually I got to a point in my writing where I was like, wait a minute, I've got like 30,000 words here. Maybe I can flesh this out into something a little bit bigger. So that's ultimately what I did. And it turned into a full-fledged book, which I then put out earlier this year, knowing how healing it was for me to express all of this in the most open and public of ways. I thought, how can I offer a path towards that same feeling of healing and therapy to other people? And that's where the podcast formed, was if I could give people a platform to talk openly and in an unfiltered way about what they went through, I think that could not only provide healing for the individual themselves, but for those who listen as well, to be able to relate and, almost find a support group and community through hearing these other stories. So I knew pretty early on that with the podcast, I always tell the guests this. I'm like, the less I speak, the better, because I want them to really tap into the deepest emotions that they felt and really just vent it all out in a raw and honest way. And, I don't really do too much editing after the recording is done. I try my best to keep it as close to what the conversation actually was like as I can. Obviously, there are points where if I'm saying little things that need to be cleaned up, I take that out. But ultimately, I just want to give space for people to talk about the things that a lot of the times they can't really talk about in their daily lives. There's a lot of obstacles for some people to get past that keep them from putting this stuff out openly. And I think if you're not doing that, it means you're pushing it down and suppressing it. To me, that has an energetic effect. I think it can affect your health. I think if you're not letting these things out in an appropriate way, then there can be negative consequences to that. So knowing how much stigma there is around donor conception and that it's not an easy thing for people to talk about, I wanted to be as gentle and as caring and empathetic towards the experiences of other people going through the same thing that I went through as I could be. And yeah, that's sort of the thinking behind the podcast. I think we're like 25 or 26 episodes into it at this point. And yeah, most of it is with donor conceived people. Those are the episodes that everyone has access to. About a month or two ago, I began a subscribers episode where people can opt in to hear stories from donors, from myself. In the future, I want to speak with recipient parents and other therapists that have a focus on donor conceived people, really just trying to amplify the voices of people who are going through a process that we all know needs a lot of change still somehow today. So that's kind of the thinking behind it all.
Well, I think that's fantastic. I mean, we never feel like we've got rival podcasts out there. The community is getting bigger all the time, and there's room for all of us in the pool. Kudos to you for doing that, because getting these voices out there is important. And podcasts like yours might actually help with legislation as well. Once the right people hear it and get it, changes need to be made.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's not necessarily the goal. It would be amazing to have legislative change come from something that, this is just a project that for now I'm focusing on a little bit more. This was something I was doing in my spare time beyond my full-time job. And you're right. Like, there's no such thing as a competitor podcast in this space, because I think we all know what's needed most is louder voices and people who are speaking up on behalf of a group that doesn't have all of the rights that they deserve. Yeah. Like, the more the merrier here. I would love it if there were hundreds of podcasts around this stuff, because it just means the message is getting out there more and more. And also saving people from the struggles that many of us have dealt with. It's all about creating a brighter future for the people who are donor conceived, because I don't think donor conception is going anywhere. But the way we go about it, especially on the anonymity side of things, like, that can be changed, and that can make it an easier path forward for people that are brought into the world this way.
Yeah, when we started this podcast, 3.5 years ago, it was initially just a tell Kendall's story. Like, we wanted to be able to get that out there. And then once we started having guests on, we were educated really quickly, about things that are happening in the worlds of adoption and donor conception, etc. And, I didn't know much at all about the fertility industry, and like what we found out is horrifying. But again, yeah, it's being able to share these voices and share people's stories. And that's why we welcome donors. We welcome donor conceived people, recipients, all of it.
There's a lot of different ways that you can look at the way that this process plays out. I think the donor conceived person is the prioritized view because we are the affected people.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to hear from all those other people that are part of the journey. And that typically means donors and recipient parents and really anyone that's connected to this.
We really don't know how big the communities are, and I'm sure they're bigger than we think.
Totally. And it's international too. Like, this is a worldwide phenomenon. So yeah, I think we're still maybe in the awareness stage and trying to explain to people like what donor conception actually is. But I think we're approaching a point where this is almost, it might not be common knowledge, but like, everyone is going to be connected to somebody that's gone through this, friend, a family member, or a friend of a friend. They just don't know it yet. And I think any parent that's gone through this and hasn't shared the truth, they got to muster up the courage and address the truth. I think it's understandable why they may have taken the path of not sharing this, especially when you're decades into keeping this suppressed. But there's no looking away from it anymore. And yeah, that's something that I think a lot of us in the DCP community are thankful to the DNA companies for exposing. Because without them, I probably still wouldn't know the truth. Many of us wouldn't know the truth. So to me, that should have been the tipping point for a lot of parents who, once you realize that the answers are available, it's better that they come from you rather than, a corporation.
So Nick, what we've been doing recently for our final question of the episode is asking about it. And specifically, I think for you, like, was there a musical artist or a song that you leaned on while you were writing the book that kind of helps you through the challenging times?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that, because the book chapters, the titles of the chapters in part 1 are all song titles of songs that come from artists that have had a special place in my heart for my entire life. So I guess to identify a few of them, David Bowie has always been a very present artist in my life. I find I can't really go too long without putting his music on. And I think when it comes to being donor conceived, it's maybe not so surprising that he's one of the artists that first come to mind, because over the course of his career, he changed his identity in so many different ways. And I think DCPs can probably relate to that in having to kind of reintroduce themselves and, kind of let people know that part of their identity isn't exactly what they thought it was. Tom Petty was also a pretty big influential artist growing up for me. I think his songs are pretty timeless. And then of the more modern acts, I really, really love the band Spoon. They're kind of like an indie rock band that's been around since the late 90s. And for some reason, their songs have always stuck with me. The one that I reference in the book is called The Ghost of You Lingers, which is tied to the chapter that's related to the donor. And I just kind of found that to be an appropriate title because, there's this element of me that is unknown and it's always around and I can't see it, but it's there and it's a part of who I am. And trying to understand what those things are is really what a big part of my life is now. But I love that you asked that, because music is such it's a tool for healing for me. I mean, I can't even count how many concerts I've been to over the course of my life. It's in the 400 or 500s. Part of what I find so healing myself is like going out dancing. So music is always present in my life. And I think that is a medicine for many of us as we try to process these difficult emotions. Music can really be helpful with that. So Thank you for asking that question. I think you should keep asking that.
Absolutely. No, thank you for the great answer. Like, we're the same. I mean, music is a constant for us, and we don't go to concerts as much anymore because we're getting to be old codgers. But like when Kendall and I first got together, I mean, we were probably going at least once a week,
Yeah.
And especially when we lived in the Bay Area, I mean, there were so many great venues there. I actually was at Tom Petty's second to last concert before he passed. And it was probably my favorite. Well, it's hard to say because we've been to quite a few Tom Petty shows, but it's definitely, it had to be in the top two just because the set list was perfect. Like, I wouldn't have changed a thing.
Yeah.
And it was at the Greek in Berkeley, so a really cool, intimate venue. And I was pretty crushed when we lost Tom, but I lean on his music a lot still.
Yeah. It cuts to the heart. It really, his music, the songs are so simple, but it's just the perfect combination of songwriting and beautiful lyrics. There's something special about him. And I lived in New York City for about 11 years. And when he came to Forest Hill Stadium for what would have been his last New York show, I was like, I'll catch him next time. And every time I think of that, I'm like, oh man, I really messed that one up. But thankful to say I did see him. It was one of the best shows that I ever saw. I wish I got one more gig out of it, but his music lives on forever.
I definitely the Tom Petty channel on Sirius is one that's in regular rotation.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, we really appreciate what you're doing. We'll definitely share links to your podcast and the book in our show notes. And just keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I appreciate you, first off, creating the space for people like me to come on and tell their stories. And I thank you for actually inviting me on the show. I really feel like I've told my story so many times, but it still never gets old. And I think just getting my and every other donor conceived person's story out there on as many outlets as we can, that's the way that we'll shift out of that awareness stage and actually go into a place where real change can take place. So thank you, guys. It was nice meeting you both. I appreciate your time.
That was part 2 with Nick, and we just love how he turned his story into something bigger than the shock that started it. A book, a podcast, and a whole lot of honesty. That takes guts. If you heard something today that feels a little close to home, we'd love to hear from you. Your story matters, and even if you think it's small, even if you think it's messy, even if you're still figuring it out, reach out to us because you never know who needs to hear what you've been holding. And if you know someone who might connect with Nick's experience, please pass this episode along. Sharing these conversations is how people find community in the middle of a twist they never asked for. Until next time, this is Family Twist, where family secrets are the ultimate plot twist. The Family Twist podcast is produced by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage LLC and presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.